The reign of Jafar metagame has begun. And, well, if I'm being honest, Jafar is not really a part of it, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some very interesting new cards from set 8 that are really making an impact early in the Disney Lorcana metagame for this set. Today, we're going to be talking about the best decks of week 1 from their ink combination, respectively, also discussing the meta breakdown as a whole. There wasn't too many tournaments this past weekend, if I'm being honest. There was one fairly large, very promoted event that we're going to be discussing, which was Southside Gaming. And there was a few other little events that trickled in around 30 players. But it's still, hey, let's look at this information. Let's see what different parts of the nation and different parts of the globe are doing in the Disney Lorcana metagame. With that, let's get into the meta breakdown this week. Here we have it, guys. It is the week 1 meta breakdown for the Reign of Jafar. Set 8 is here with the impact of 11 decks in top 8s across the globe. Amber Steel Aggro comes in at number 1, picking up a few new cards for that deck, making it a bit more difficult to interact with. Emerald Steel Discard is back, picked up the big win for Southside Gaming. That's the first deck we're going to be looking at on this video. And of course, Ruby Sapphire items finding a couple homes. Sapphire Amethyst mid-range. This really was a tough one because none of them were in top 8s. There was a version of this list that won a 33-player event this past weekend, but the ones covered on this list are talking from SSG Miami. Amethyst Ruby picked up a nice top 4 and some top 8s as well. The Amber Emerald Aggro, which is whether we want to discuss it as dogs or just in time, which is the list that we're going to be looking at, had a couple successful this past weekend. Amethyst Steel mid-range, which was debatably the most successful deck in set 7, does not have a very good opening weekend. Amethyst Emerald Discard was another breakout deck from set 7. Isn't really finding a home just yet. Sapphire Steel Aggro, the Kiwi version, is a list we're going to be talking about on this video as well. And then we had an Amber Emerald Songs and an Amethyst Emerald mid-range. So a pretty big breakdown in general for week 1. There's still 11 decks, not crazy numbers. Obviously, the highest here is 6 because honestly, there just wasn't as many tournaments to really break down and really discuss. But it is nice to see that there's some nice healthiness across the board. It's interesting to see some of the better decks from set 7 kind of falling off. But it's only week 1. Obviously, Amethyst Steel did not get a ton of new, like, oh my god cards. So because of that, when you look at a deck like Amber Steel and you see, 3, 4 new potential cards for that deck to play, it's not too shocking. Emerald Steel picking up a wonderful card like Beyond the Horizon is a card that we're going to be discussing in a little bit as well. They're just picked up these different tools. Even Ruby Sapphire picked up a few nice tools for the item variants, and honestly, maybe even a new action for the action variants. So there's a lot really that's going on here that makes a lot of sense. And early on in the honestly, like in the early developments of the metagame, I always expect aggro to kind of just be out there in front, while there were some nice new control cards that were brought out for some other Amethyst strategies. It just didn't come through in week 1 because honestly, they're probably still figuring out. They're still figuring out the deck. They're still figuring out how they have to interact with things. So it's not too shocking again. Like Amber Steel aggro being the most successful deck, well, that's kind of a duh to me. Nonetheless, let's get into this week's decks. Let's break them all down. Emerald Steel Discard, played by Mark Miller, picked up the first place finish at Southside's Gaming 89-player tournament. This entire event was streamed over on Southside's Gaming. Wonderful calls by Gabe, Skinner, and Liam. And of course, we have a couple new toys. The only set 8 card in this deck is a pair of Beyond the Horizon. Beyond the Horizon is a 7-cost uninkable action song for steel, which is sing together 7 and choose any number of players. They discard their hands and draw 3 cards each. There was a pretty infamous clip from the event where Mark Beyond the Horizon his opponent, which discarded 5 cards when Mark had 3 Prince Johns in play, which is kind of humorous to say that this play was able to happen with only 3 Prince Johns in the deck and only 2 Beyond the Horizon in the deck. But because of it, his opponent discarded 5 cards, which meant he got to draw 1 card for each Prince John, which in the end, he ended up drawing 18 cards of his deck. That's right, nearly a third of his deck in one sing together is pretty ridiculous. There's a bunch of people calling for the head of Prince John again. I don't know if we're there quite yet, but I do think that it's kind of comical that these plays are possible with a card like Beyond the Horizon. Aside from that, this list is a pretty straightforward deck. It does have a couple odds and ends that are quite interesting, like the addition of I Find in My Platinum, which is a little bit of item hate, and of course the return of a Grab Your Swords. I believe the Grab Your Swords is a bit of an attribute to the mirror. The idea that, this deck is going to be pretty much all over the place. You really do need some interactions with opposing Prince Johns, specifically ones that aren't going to hide out in the cove. You have to find answers to the cove and things like that. So this just does little chip damage and then allows for a nice little way to interact with the cove. Of course, Spire Pirate Space Pete is still a dominant card in the metagame, and it's still a card that's very difficult for Amber Steel decks to deal with, and therefore that's the real reason why I believe this deck has a lot of potential early on. With so many steel decks being prevalent in the metagame, you need to find good answers to a gigantic character that also has resist. So I think that truly Pete and Diablo, along with the company of cards like Muses, Ursula, and Prince John, is just a nice little threat pairing that are very difficult to deal with for most decks. Shout out to Mark for picking up the big win at Southside Gaming. Justin Rios picked a top 8 up at the Southside Gaming Tournament as well, and this deck is a pretty straightforward aggro deck. Of course, we have a couple new additions to the metagame here. First, let's start with Lady Family Dog. Lady is a 3-cost inkable, 2 strength, 2 willpower with 2 lore, and the ability Someone to Care For. When you play this character, you may play a character with 2 or less for free. So that means you can simply put a lady into play on turn 3 and then immediately play a piglet, play a Penny Bolt's person, a Daisy Duck, a Cinderella, a Doc, a Calhoun, a Smee. This list has a lot of options for Lady on turn 3, but really what you're effectively doing is you're playing a 3-cost 2 lore character followed by an additional 2 lore character on average. This is a really tempo incredibly answer me now play, and there aren't a lot of decks in the format that can really contend with that much lore that early. In this kind of concept on the play, if we go Daisy into a Smee, into a Lady plus Piglet, that is a ton of lore to contend with early, and most decks just do not have the removal to answer all of that. And of course, the follow up to the new Reign of Jafar shift line, Rhino 1/16th Wolf, is the 1-cost inkable 1/2 with 1 lore, and the ability that how, when you play this character, chosen opposing character gets -1 until the start of your next turn, which is a pretty relevant ability when you're protecting certain characters. And of course, the wonderful Rhino Power Hamster is the 4-cost inkable 4 strength, 3 willpower, 2 lore with shift 2 and the ability Epic Ball of Awesome. When this character has no damage, he gains resist 2. So he is effectively a 4-cost 4/5. That is a big deal when you can shift this character into play on turn 2. There simply is not anything in the game that answers this card without damaging it first that early on turn 2. You really need some help. You need some different ways to kind of interact with this card, but it really does just remove all of the threats from the game. Saying, nope, can't Calhoun, nope, you can't Smee, like there's just no good answers to this card whatsoever. It's almost always going to get you an effective 2-for-1, technically a 2-for-2 because of the shift line. But nonetheless, it's also a phenomenal card late in the game. This is a good card that on turn 4 or later on in top decks, if you just slam a Rhino down, that 2 resist really does make it that much more difficult for many decks to answer him. The other nice addition that we've seen come up from time to time in this list is Rapunzel's Tower. That's right, the wonderful 2-cost inkable 1 to move to 8 willpower amber location that just simply reads safe and sound. Characters get +3 while here. This just adds on to the ability of making Rapunzel a little bit better, just giving everything a little bit more hardiness. A lot of the times, the reason you play Hidden Cove is not only for the strength, but it's definitely for the willpower. So adding a +3 willpower to any character late in the game definitely makes it more difficult for your opponents to interact with. All in all, huge shout out to Justin here phenomenal deck. Nice suite of new Amber slash the Amber Steel dueling cards that really are putting this deck on the map early on. Sapphire Amethyst Control mid range, whatever you want to call it. This deck did get a gigantic addition from Into the Unknown. That's right. I'm not talking about Monstro, the infamous whale. We're talking about Into the Unknown, the 3-cost inkable action song that simply reads, put chosen exerted character into their player's inkwell face down and exerted. This is a wonderful addition to this deck because it desperately needed more removal. As you can see, we removed the Let It Goes for the Into the Unknowns. Having the 5 cost is nice, but there's so many more 3-cost cards in this deck that can sing this card. It also has the innate ability to kind of act as a 1-jump if necessary. It's not really what you want to be doing, but if you have a certain line and you're looking to go faster and you're playing against certain decks that you know Into the Unknown's not going to be that particularly good against until late in the game, you can simply play a pop on 1, put a bell into play by banishing the popsicle, and then on turn 2, you can be off to the races and you can have a Tipo ink sing Into the Unknown, put your bell into the inkwell, and all of a sudden you're going to go into turn 3 with a ton of ink in play. So again, this isn't the most ideal thing, but in certain circumstances, it's going to be very difficult for your opponents to answer very big cards early on. Even the idea that you can put Elsa into play on turn 3 is fairly dangerous. For the rest of it, this deck did pick up Monstro, the infamous whale, which is the 8-cost inkable, 6 strength, 8 willpower, 2 lore with rush, and the ability full breach, choose and discard a card, ready this character, he can't quest for the rest of the turn. What this enables is basically the board clear that Amethyst Sapphire players have been wanting. I saw this come up in several decks this past weekend. I never saw it hit play particularly, but it is a card that does kind of stand for this pseudo scar that you would love to work with. Aside from that, Blurple did get some other additions, but none of those cards are seeing play early on. I will be really curious if certain cards from this ink combination start to come to the forefront and real players continue to test this format. I do think that this is a very early on simple addition. Remove, let it go, play Into the Unknown makes a lot of sense. Throw a couple Monstros in the deck because people truly believe that this is going to be the answer for this list. And I think that that's just a nice, subtle, simple way to do that. Really nothing else crazy about this. We did not have room for Aggro in this list. For me, if we're playing Peter Pan Shadow, I think it's pretty effortless to put the Iago into your deck. And he's just kind of massive, which is nice to see as well. All in all, solid shout out to Mai here for picking up a top 16 this past weekend at Southside Gaming. Hey guys, wanted to interrupt real quick and discuss what our Metafy is doing this summer. Right now, we are working on the Ultimate Finance Guide. Scott Landis has been putting the effort, putting the pen to the paper, and he's been giving out tips for the start of the Reign of Jafar set. But not only that, he's going to be updating this kind of through the summer and really kind of just giving you guys the best ability to become better buyers for Disney Lorcana. And we're not just talking about singles, we're talking about other ways to kind of make your penny pinches just a little bit more and get the most out of your dollar when spending money on Lorcana. He's also going to be working on a big deal with Fabled. With the set rotation, how's that going to affect? What's it going to do? Scott's going to kind of give you his opinions on the best cards to bet on and kind of just what you can do to survive that rotational format in general. And of course, the other thing we have is the Amethyst Steel Doc Guide. This is a guide that's about to get a big update. We're going to be discussing what is going on for this deck. How is it going to be successful in the metagame? Do we need to go back to aggro? Can we contend with cards like Lady? All of those conversations and more are going to be answered on the channel soon, and specifically the articles in this particular Metafy. Again, this is the best way to support the Forbidden Mountain. If you're looking to get in there, go purchase a guide, go join the support tier, join us on Discord, private chat. With last night, we were having a lot of fun talking in there about not necessarily Lorcana, but just having good conversations, good vibes. So if you're looking to support us, definitely go check out our Metafy. Thank you. Let's get back to the video. Ruby Amethyst Evasives picked up a top 4 finish at the Encounter this past weekend, played by our good friend Ricky. That's right. What is better than just one 2 cost 3/1 with Evasive? Well, how about two of them? Pegasus and Vanellope von Schweetz picks up the big stack of 2 cost 3/1 Evasives. This deck is like, no, I am not gonna lose to Diablo, and I love it. You can also see 4 Peter Pan Shadow Finders here, which is phenomenal. Nothing really too different aside from that, but there is a very interesting note that this deck is very much an evasive burn-esque deck. We are a 4 Maui Shark deck, and you can see here that we have Befuddles, Brawls, Finders Keepers, Dragonfires, Pirate's Life, Friends on the other side, and of course, Be Prepared. So while we're playing the best version of kind of challenge removal with the form of Peter Pan Shadowfinder, giving all of these wonderful cards in our deck evasive, like literally every card in this deck has Rush except Diablo when Peter Pan is in play. So of course, sorry, Merlin Crab also doesn't have Rush. My bad. Don't crucify me. I'm sorry. But this deck is really fun, really interesting, and definitely performed for Ricky. And really, what I'm showcasing this list for is because coming up on this weekend, we're going to be streaming the PPG 1K event for the summit, where is the winner at the encounter is going to win a buy to the Pro Play Games Pro Summit in Texas, which is an event that we're going to be covering at length as we approach it and kind of discuss all of the wonderful things that can happen at that event. There's also a whole video on here already. If you're looking to hear more about it, go listen to the voices of Machado and Steve themselves as they discuss what this is. But this weekend, Ricky is a local, always shows up to the encounter, showcasing like, hey, this is what some of the local metagame is for some of the players that might be coming in. And we're going to be discussing some of the other decks that were successful from the encounter this weekend as well. Nonetheless, I think that this deck was fun. It looks good. It's interesting. Found its way into a top 4 in a 30-player tournament. So this is definitely a deck that, if you haven't really been showcasing too much Ruby Amethyst, you haven't been feeling the love, I do think that Peter Pan Shadowfinder might be the key ingredient that Amethyst decks are going to need to really contend in this metagame, because you're going to have a way to answer characters very quickly and then have a card that really helps you get back in the game and pull along. I think that this deck and this version of this deck is kind of a lean towards what is possible for Ruby Amethyst in set 8. Ruby Sapphire items played, then the one, the only, the homie, S. Datakuma Stefan, top 4 in the encounter this past weekend. He's been playing Ruby Sapphire for as long as I can remember, if I'm being honest. And I really love some of the new cards showcased from Reign of Jafar in this deck list. So starting with the new cards, let's talk about the Wardrobe. The Wardrobe is a 4-cost, inkable, 3-strength, 4 willpower, 1 lore with the ability I have just the thing. Exert this, choose and discard an item card, and draw 2 cards. That's right, this is the absolute fixed version of Hiram Flavorsham. You don't get the ability on entry. You have to discard the card from your hand instead of banishing it in play, so you don't get the effect of the item. This is a super watered down Hiram. It's the most fair version of Hiram ever. But is this the piece that this deck was missing? It really kind of fell off. The item version of this deck fell off pretty hard after the Hiram ban. The Wardrobe might be the answer to this list in general. And I really love seeing this card come out and play early on in the Reign of Jafar metagame. The other new addition to this card is Get Out, the 6-cost uninkable Ruby Sapphire dual ink card that simply reads banish chosen character, then return an item card from your discard to your hand. I really love this card. I think it's very interesting. I think the idea that for 1 more, it is a Dragonfire plus. It's basically a Dragonfire plus 1/2 of a Tamatoa. I think that's very, very interesting. I think it gives you a lot of play, and I think the extra cost doesn't mean too much. I think it just adds another nice level play in the mid game. Very often this deck goes ramp ramp, and when it goes ramp ramp, in the past we've seen cards like Medusa hit play, things like that. This might be a way to say, hey, like I'm going to get my popsicle back on turn 6, and I'm going to banish a character, because sometimes you can't just play a Tamatoa 6 on turn 4 because your opponent is already so far ahead that you can't really give them the opportunity to gain more lore. You have to get one step closer to the removal a little bit faster, and in this situation, we have Sisus and things like that. There are no Be Prepared in this list, which is notable as well. And of course, no Maui Shark. But I do really like the addition of this card in general. The other new addition is the Sword of Shan Yu, which is the one cost inkable ruby item with the ability Worthy Weapon. Exert one of your characters. Ready chosen character. This they can't quest for the rest of this turn. This is a very interesting card to add to this deck. I'm not even necessarily sure what it's doing outside of just being a one cost inkable. I don't know how often this came up. I did not talk to Stefan about this. I did talk to him about Get Out and the Wardrobe, and he liked both of those cards, but I didn't actually notice the Sword of Shan Yu until much later when I was kind of building the meta report. All in all, this card's interesting. It's different. It's enchanted. So if there's any world where this card becomes playable, the enchantments are pretty cheap right now. Maybe you want to pick them up. Nonetheless, very interesting addition to this. Aside from that, this is a Maurice's Workshop deck. I do not love the Fishbone Quills in this list. Shout out to Jonathan Williams. He was a top 16 finisher in Southside Gaming this past weekend, and he was playing Great Stone Dragons instead of Fishbone Quill. I do think that that's probably correct, and I really like the addition of Great Stone Dragon in this list a little bit more. Other than that, this is a deck that we've seen come here and there every once in a while. Bells and Scrooges were a big impact at the beginning of Set 7 metagame and then fell off with after the ban of Hiram. So it's nice to see those cards kind of back in action, along with, of course, the Tamatoa Happy as a Clam. All in all, this list is very good, very fun, very different. And you have to start wondering, like, what does this deck need to do to propel itself back into a tier 1 status? Shout out to Stefan again for an awesome top 4. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend. How about a shout out to TFM Scott? He doesn't get out of the house too often to play Disney Lorcana, but when he does, he brings it. And this past weekend, he picked up a top 4 finish at the encounter with Sapphire Steel. This list probably looks familiar to many that are Sapphire Steel fans because it 100% was a carbon copy of Harlan Sweetie. Shout out to Harlan. Go check him out. He covers this deck at length almost on a daily basis, it seems. But nonetheless, he's doing the great amount of work for this deck. And the reason why I talked to Scott and said, hey, I think that this is the deck to play this weekend was because of the simplicity of it. I think that this deck is very much just stats and answers. And that's all you're doing. You're like, all right, I got my 4 Fire the Cannons. I got my 4 Strength of a Raging Fire. I'm going to answer the problematic cards that really, take me off my game. And then every card I'm going to play after that is just figure it out. The idea that this deck can, just go Robin, Smee, Alice, Arthur, like that line is kind of ridiculous because you're playing a Alice that is not very easy to remove. Then you're playing a 6/6 for 4 that has 3 lore. I mean, this card's insane. When we talk about this list at length, it really is just the epitome of stats. I think there's less than 12 Sapphire cards in this deck, which is kind of comical. But that's kind of just where we are. Yeah, there's 11 Sapphire cards in this list. It's just the 4 Alice, the 4 Cogsworth, the 3 Tipo, and of course the Dual Ink edition of Arthur. All in all, this list is just exactly as I explained it. It's simply put my character in play and tell my opponent to figure it out. But this deck does it to the next level because you're putting problematic characters in play early. We're talking about Arthur here, which is a 3 lore character. It is the brand new set up Reign of Jafar, set 8, 4 ink, 6 strength, 6 willpower, 3 lore, dual link, Sapphire Steel card with the ability, no more books, skip your turn, draw step. And what I really love about the flavor of that is it's basically saying that in order to learn, we have to draw cards. And this is saying like, nope, we're not reading anymore. Don't care. Put the stats in play, turn them sideways, challenge anything you want. Use sometimes we see popsicles show up here and there. Nonetheless, I think that this is an awesome card. I love that this card's seeing play. It plays so very well into cards like Doc and Desperate Plan because what it does, it allows you to put a character into play on curve that's so above the curve that it's worth not drawing a card. And then it just follows up with saying, okay, I'm going to miss my draw step, but it's probably going to make just playing Doc a little bit easier, make Desperate Plan play a little bit easier. Because honestly, playing Doc is one thing and discarding whatever's left in your hand that doesn't matter to draw cards. You can't necessarily do that with Desperate Plan. You need to be an empty hand. So not drawing a card and skipping that draw step is a big way to get Desperate Plan online. What I also love about this list is that, hey, Pluto, Chenpo, gigantic stats. John Silver, the ship's cook, is a card I've loved since it was released in set 6. The 3-cost inkable, 3-strength, 3-power, 1 lore, and the ability Hunk of Hardware. When you play this character, chosen character can't challenge during their next turn. This is another good card, kind of like a pseudo time walk type card that just enables you to protect even further. When you have these big giant bodyguards, it's very difficult for your opponent to interact. And that's exactly why I thought that this was the perfect deck for Scott this weekend. I thought it was a deck that, like, hey, I know you haven't been playing much. You haven't had a whole lot of time to really depict the metagame. So it's nice to say, like, listen, this is a deck that doesn't necessarily care. It's just like, put your guys in play well as a player. Scott's a very good player in general, but it's, he likes to play more of those control strategies. So the fact that he couldn't and really didn't understand the metagame to a T, and obviously early on in the metagame, it's even more difficult for that when a new set comes out. So it just felt like the best weekend to put it on display. And honestly, this deck wasn't successful really anywhere else. So it's nice to say that, like, hey, Scott picked this deck up, first time he's ever played this deck, and he was able to find a way into a top 4. So huge shout out to Scott at the encounter. Again, this weekend on the Forbidden Mountain, we're going to be streaming the Encounter's 1K PPG Summit buy event. Definitely, if you're looking forward to seeing more Reign of Jafar gameplay, hit subscribe, check out the stream this weekend. We'll be live on Sunday at noon. Amethyst Emerald Discard finds a top 4 finish in the 89-player Southside Gaming tournament this past weekend. And what were the cards that were entered into this deck from Reign of Jafar? Well, of course, it's none other than Pull the Lever, Kronk. The 3-cost inkable dual ink Emerald Amethyst action has the ability of choose 1, draw 2 cards, or each opponent chooses and discard a card. Now, of course, this version is the Diablo variance, where you are gaining a little bit more out of discard because you're playing cards like Ursula, Prince John, Sudden Chill, even to a greater extent, we don't talk about Bruno, so you have a little bit of ways to interact with discard and kind of just really interacting with your opponent that way. But the other addition is Wrong Lever. And of course, that is a 3-cost inkable Emerald action with the ability to choose 1, return chosen character to their player's hand, or put a card named Pull the Lever from your discard on the bottom of your deck to put chosen character on the bottom of their player's deck. We call that a tuck. Whenever you're able to put a card on the bottom of their deck, this is a kind of a one-sided mini Under the Sea that's very specific, but even having a 3-cost inkable bounce your character is pretty relevant. It also, by note, can return your cards to your hand. So you could also play a Cricky, buff your board, make a good trade, and then on the following turn, quest for 3, and then pick up your Cricky again to protect that 3 lore, which I think is very interesting. It has the ability to pick up Elsa's again. So this deck is not really playing snakes. It's only playing 2 foxes. So it is adding another way to bounce your own cards when necessary, which I think is definitely very, very relevant. We're also a Peter Pan Shadow Finder deck, which I do love again. That's why we have the big Iagos, the giant spectral parrots. I think this deck is really cool. It's really interesting. I think it plays in the metagame pretty well. If you are a good pilot for it, I think it's very targeted to the metagame. So I think this is a deck that we're going to see kind of just mix and match the next couple weeks, seeing what the numbers are. As you can see, all the numbers here are very interesting. 2 foxes, 3 crabs, 2 Peter Pan, 2 Iago, 2 Cricky. We're still kind of playing with those numbers, seeing what is important for this list. I'm very interested to see how this develops over the next few weeks. Amber Emerald Aggro also came out to play, but it was just in time for this metagame. That's right, just in time. In what year is it? 2025, coming up on the 2-year anniversary of Disney Lorcana, and we are back to this deck. That's right, for the OGs, okay? For the OGs of Disney Lorcana that remember a time of playing on a digital client that we can't really talk about anymore, but you still might actually use it for webcams. Uh, that's right. We were talking about just in time into Cusco's. And now here we are nearly 2 years later, and this deck is in top eight of a 90 player tournament. Love to see it. Let's break it down. So, of course, the new cards from Reina Jafar are the one cost lady, the decisive dog, which is the inkable one cost character, zero strength, three willpower, one lore with two abilities. Pack of her own. Whenever you play a character, this character gets plus one strength this turn, and take the lead. While this character has three strength or more, she gets plus two lore. She is also a wonderful, and I do mean the potential chase enchanted of the set. So that's something to look out for as you're opening your Reign of Jafar booster packs, of course. So Lady here is a wonderful addition, and it is a exact combo with the two cost Tramp. So Tramp, the Enterprise Dog, was the two cost, one strength, three willpower, one lore with two abilities. Hey Pidge, if you have a character named Lady in play, you pay one less to play this character to make it a one cost 1/3. And it also has the ability No Time for Wisecracks. When you play this character, chosen character of yours gets plus one strength this turn for each other character you have in play. So Tramp has this wonderful ability to only cost one and then come out a few turns later and then buff your lady to have a nice three lore character, kind of very similar to Piglet in a way, where Piglet needs the characters in play. So does Lady and this Tramp dual pair ability to get that bonus lore, but it seems pretty effortless if I'm being honest. Aside from the Lady Decisive Dog, there's no new Reign of Jafar cards added to this list, and you could have played this deck in set one. There's not even, Lady Family Dogs in this list, which I find very interesting as well. And I wonder if that just came down to the ability of maybe not being able to find it or not knowing how to fit it. All in all, the coolest cards in this list are some cards that we definitely have not ever talked about really on this channel, which is the five cost inkable, one strength, four willpower, three lore, goofy expert shipwright that has ward and clever design. Whenever this character quests, chosen character gains ward until the start of your next turn. The idea that you can just in time this character into play and then start protecting characters after that is kind of insane. Having the ability to play a Goofy on turn 3, and on turn 4, you can just go Piglet and some other threat, and then you can quest with your Goofy and give Piglet ward. That's a pretty big way to kind of save another 3 lore. Ward on top of ward is great. Obviously, there aren't too many characters that interact with Goofy well. Amethyst does it pretty well, with foxes and of course with Peter Pans and Iagos, and there's definitely ways to get around that. But this card is also later in the game without Just in Time, a nice 3 lore character that gets put into play on turn 5 that your opponent can't interact with ever because it has ward. So it really does have a nice, unique position in the metagame. I also love the Shift Pegasus line, of course. You can see there's 4 of the 1 cost Pegasus and then 4 of the 5 cost Pegasus, enabling that nice protection line as well. We can have a crazy blowout turn like Daisy into a Curse Merfolk, and then follow that up with a Pegasus that'll enable a turn 3 Shift Pegasus, give my whole board evasive, quest for big numbers, and really make things very problematic. I think that this deck probably has the most opportunity to put so many good cards into play early and really threaten the board so very well. And the idea that Just in Time lets you cheat cards into play like Cricky, like Lady, like Goofy, and even Pegasus to a certain extent just means you always have threats. The other thing this card can do is you could quest with a Piglet potentially if we have, if all the stars align, and then you can Just in Time take a 1 cost off of your spend to ready your Piglet and protect it that way. It also has, of course, Kick Cloud Kickers as a way to interact with the board a little bit as well. I just think this deck is very cool, very interesting. I'm very curious on how this deck is going to kind of mold over the next several weeks if other people are going to really jump on to the aggressive play style that this deck and Nathan was able to bring to Southside Gaming. On the other side of the coin, Hector picked up a top 16 this past weekend with Amber Emerald Songs. That's right. This deck really did not get a lot of new cards, but is it a very interesting answer to the metagame? Because I think that that's really what the conversation is about. When the, you know, Amber Emerald's heyday was DLC Toronto, where it won, played by Diego. Shout out to him. Good luck at Worlds. And this is a deck that came out really just on all cylinders and having a breakout tournament in DLC Chicago or DLC Toronto. And it hasn't done much since. And if you look at this deck, there isn't any new card except for this one lonely two pair of chips, the Quick Thinker, which is the 4 cost, 3 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore with the ability I'll handle this. When you play this character, chosen opponent chooses and discards a card. And a lot of people I've seen that are talking about this list were saying, oh, well, why would you play Chip over Daisy? You can't Muses it. Well, the truth is, guys, it's not about the discard. It's about the 3 strength and that this character can actually banish things where Daisy cannot. So I think that that's where we are right now with the Quick Thinker, is that you have, on those turns where, of course, this deck hates, and I do mean, I mean it, guys. Like, listen, we're not even kidding. This deck hates Pete's Games Referee more than any other card in Disney Lorcana. And I know a lot of decks are like that. Trust me, I know a lot of decks hate seeing Pete. But this deck is a literal setup, and then set up, and then just go like, all right, now I'm going to do everything possible to have this crazy turn with all of these songs and actions in my hand. And when Pete comes down, you're like, oh, man, what do I do? Like, God, this Pete is going to get me. I can't believe it. Having a chip to play is what's important about this. Is like, okay, that's my turn 4. I'll just play this. I'll hopefully get rid of that dock, that last card in their hand. Hopefully I'll get rid of that desperate plan. And I will put them on like, this is your board. This is how you're going to have to beat me. And then hopefully that is enough to kind of just move you into that later stage of the game to where you can sing Under the Sea, where you can play the Kitas, kind of do all the combos that you need to do. All in all, I think that this deck is very fun. I think it's very cool. We talked about Tramp before. I think that the Tramp is a very overlooked card in this deck. This is a deck that really does put cards into play and does not turn them sideways until it's absolutely necessary. So that was what I think is most interesting about this list, is that it really hasn't gotten many new cards. Even if, honestly, if you really look at this, it's 1 Tramp and 2 chips. Everything else has been around since set 5. Like, there's not a whole lot of additions of this. This is a Shimmering Skies deck with only 3 new cards from 3 sets. So just think about that as you're really getting into this. If you're an Amber Emerald Songs enjoyer, this might be a nice little way to kind of move this deck forward. Reign of Jafar, week 1 metagame. For me, these were the standout cards. And I know that Goofy was not covered in this video, but in all honesty, it was the one card that in testing, as I was watching the team get prepped for their tournaments this past weekend, and of course, even this weekend coming up, and the following weekend, lots of Disney Lorcana to be played early in the metagame. These are the cards that have definitely stood out to me in big ways. Rhino came out of nowhere. That's a card that I don't think people really were attached to. When they saw, the 1 cost Rhino, they weren't really interested. But seeing how good a 4/5 is on turn 2, it's pretty nice. Lady, Family Dog, I mean, that card's insane. The Into the Unknown was definitely a piece of the combo that the card, that in combination was missing. The Tramp was another card that didn't see a whole lot of play or like anything in this video, but it's still a card that's very exciting. We're seeing it show up here and there in some other decks, which is very nice. I think that that's a really cool key piece. And Goofy, that Goofy is a card that people are very much overlooking, and it had a lot of success this past weekend in smaller tournaments. There was a tournament, I think it was a Dragon's Horde, that was picked up by a split finish of Amber Steel that were both playing that card, I believe. So all in all, these are the cool cards that I thought were really nice in the early goings. We'll see what cards kind of get added to this list as we go forward. You let me know if you made it this far into this video. So huge shout out to you. I am very much appreciate you. Hope this is the week 1 meta report for Reign of Jafar. Let me know down in the comments, what were you playing? What were you excited? What new cards are you building around? Definitely hit me up in the comments below. I'm very excited to hear how your Reign of Jafar path is going. All in all, thank you guys so much for watching today. If you haven't yet, definitely hit subscribe, hit the like button. If you thought this information was good, if you think it can help someone else, hit that share button, share with a friend. Thank you guys so much, and we'll catch you in the next one.